My daughter-in-law told me I had until Monday to clear out my office. Not the office at home, the one I'd been walking into for 32 years. The one with my name still etched faintly, but stubbornly into the frosted glass door on the 7th floor. She said it sweetly, too. That was the part that hurt the most. "We just think it's time, Eleanor," she said, fingers folded neatly over a leather planner that cost more than my first car. "At your age, you should be resting, enjoying life. At your age." I remember the hum of the fluorescent lights above us, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room, the way my left knee twinged the same knee I'd injured hauling boxes when this company was still run out of a converted warehouse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just nodded because shock has a way of turning you into a polite stranger inside your own body. What my daughter-in-law didn't know, what none of them knew, as they sat there smiling like they'd done me a favor, was that they had already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. Let me tell you how I got there. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 59 years old, widowed for 8 years, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the senior operations director at Halloway Solutions, a logistics firm based outside Denver. I helped build that company from a skeleton crew and a prayer into a multi-million-dollar operation. I trained half the executives who now refuse to meet my eyes. And yes, my son worked there too. Caleb, my only child. I hired him 12 years ago against my better judgment because his father had died the year before, and I mistook grief for immaturity. I told myself I was helping him get back on his feet. I told myself family comes first. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was trusting the woman he married. Marissa swept into our lives like a carefully curated storm. Perfect teeth, perfect posture, perfect concern that never quite reached her eyes. She called me Mom from the start, said it with warmth in public and impatience in private. She also happened to have an MBA and a talent for making other people's work look like her own. At first, it was small things, suggestions slipped into meetings, emails sent under joint names, credit quietly redirected. Caleb changed too. He stopped asking my advice, stopped dropping by for Sunday dinners, started talking about vision and restructuring like they were holy words. Then came Thanksgiving. We were seated around my dining table, the same one my late husband refinished by hand. The turkey was dry. My fault. I was distracted. Marissa announced between bites of cranberry sauce that they were buying a new house. A big one, gated, modern, with a home office wing. Caleb squeezed her hand and added casually, "We're putting it under the company's investment arm. Tax advantages." I looked up from my plate. "The company doesn't have a residential investment arm." Marissa smiled. "It does now." That was the first time I felt it. That cold, sliding sensation in my chest. Like a floor shifting beneath you just enough to throw off your balance. By Christmas, my responsibilities were being reassigned. Quietly. My access to certain accounts delayed. My calendar suddenly full of meetings I wasn't invited to. And then in early January, Marissa asked me to lunch. That was when she told me about Monday. "You'll still be a consultant, of course," she said. "Honorary. No pressure, no stress. Honorary. Like a plaque on a wall." I went home that night and sat alone in the dark, listening to the furnace click on and off. I thought about all the late nights, the deals salvaged, the crises averted, the son I raised to value integrity now looking through me like I was obsolete furniture. I cried. I won't pretend I didn't. But grief has a way of sharpening you too. By morning, something inside me had settled, hardened, clarified. They thought they were easing me out. What they didn't realize was that I had spent decades learning exactly how this company worked, where the contracts were buried, which signatures mattered, which secrets were hiding in plain sight. And more importantly, they didn't know what my husband had insisted we put in place before he died. By Sunday night, I had opened a file I hadn't touched in years. And by Monday morning, everything they thought they controlled was already beginning to slip through their fingers. The first thing you should know about betrayal is that it rarely announces itself. It whispers. It arrives dressed as concern, as progress, as a meeting invite labeled quick sync. On Monday morning, I walked into the office early like I always had. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. I unlocked my office and sat at my desk, hands folded, breathing slowly. I wasn't there to pack. I was there to observe. At 8:30 sharp, Caleb appeared in the doorway. He didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. Mom, he said, already tense, you're early. I've always been early, I replied. He shifted his weight eyes, flicking to the boxes stacked just outside my door. Marissa had arranged that. I recognized her efficiency everywhere now, like fingerprints I couldn't unsee. Marissa wants to make this transition smooth, he said. No need to make it harder than it is. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The crease between his brows that used to appear only when he was overwhelmed. The jaw set too tightly like he was bracing for impact. Is this what you want? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. That told me everything. By 10 o'clock, the meeting invitations started rolling out. Department heads, legal, finance, all under Marissa's name. I was copied on none of them, except one. An automated alert from the internal system. A document had been accessed. A legacy document. My heart rate picked up, but my face remained calm. I opened my laptop and logged into an account I hadn't used since my husband's funeral. The founder credentials. Most people don't realize that companies have memories. Old clauses, old agreements, safety measures installed by people who understood human nature far better than they were given credit for. My husband had been one of those people. When Holloway Solutions Incorporated, he insisted on a contingency structure, not for hostile takeovers or market crashes, for family. Any transfer of executive authority tied to blood relations required unanimous board approval and a secondary trustee sign-off. That trustee was me. Marissa either hadn't known or had assumed I was too old, too tired, too sentimental to notice. At 11:15, my phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. Please don't make a scene today. Let's be graceful about this. I smiled. At noon, the board convened. I wasn't invited. That was fine. I didn't need to be. I sent one email. 1. It contained 3 attachments and a single sentence, per the incorporation agreement dated July 15, 1991. Any restructuring involving immediate family requires my authorization. This has not been granted. The silence that followed was deafening. Within minutes, Caleb was back at my door, face pale. What did you do? He asked. I reminded them who built this house, I said, and whose name is still in the foundation. His phone rang, then Marissa's. Voices rose down the hallway. Doors closed too quickly. Someone swore. I stayed seated. Because revenge, when done properly, doesn't rush. It waits. It lets the other side exhaust itself. At 1:30, Marissa stormed into my office without knocking, all composure gone. You had no right, she hissed. You're sabotaging the company. No, I said evenly. I'm protecting it. She laughed, sharp and brittle. You're obsolete, Eleanor. This is business. I met her gaze. Then you should have read the fine print. By 5 o'clock, the board had postponed all changes pending a formal review. By 6, Caleb hadn't come home. And by the time I locked my office door that evening, carrying my purse instead of a box, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had underestimated me, and that was going to cost them far more than they imagined. If you want me to continue with chapters 3 and 4 next, let me know. By Wednesday morning, the office felt different. Not quieter, sharper. People avoided my eyes, then doubled back with forced smiles. Conversation stopped when I entered the break room. The kind of tension that buzzes just under the skin like static before a storm. Marissa had always underestimated atmosphere. She believed control lived in calendars and contracts. She never understood morale or memory. At 9 o'clock, I received a calendar invite at last. Subject line: clarification meeting. No greeting, no apology. The room was glass-walled, deliberately exposed. Marissa sat at the head of the table, legs, crossed, tablet aligned perfectly with the edge. Caleb sat 2 seats away, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Legal was there. Finance too. People I'd mentored. People who now looked like they were watching a slow-motion collision. Let's be efficient, Marissa began. Eleanor has raised concerns about authority. Concerns. As if this were a misunderstanding over parking spaces. I waited. Our council believes the clause you referenced is outdated, she continued. No longer enforceable under current governance. Legal cleared his throat. That's not entirely accurate. Marissa shot him a look. He adjusted his glasses. The clause is active. It was reaffirmed during the last restructuring signed by all parties, including Marissa. She hadn't read that part either. Caleb leaned forward. Mom, this is getting blown out of proportion. We just wanted to modernize. You don't even like the direction the company's gone. I looked at my son and felt something inside me finally crack cleanly in two. You didn't ask, I said. You decided. Marissa sighed, theatrical. This is emotional. We need to separate family feelings from business realities. Then let's talk business, I replied. Specifically, the offshore account opened under the Cayman subsidiary last spring. The room went still. Marissa's eyes flicked to Caleb. Just for a second. Enough. Finance stiffened. Legal sat up straighter. That account, I continued, was authorized for international freight expansion, not personal asset transfers. Caleb's voice came out hoarse. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said calmly. I'm asking why company funds were used to secure a private property in Aspen. Marissa stood abruptly. This is inappropriate. It's documented, I said, and reversible. Legal exhaled slowly. We'll need to review that transaction. Marissa's mask finally slipped. You went digging. I built the filing system, I replied. There's nowhere you can hide something I won't eventually find. The meeting dissolved after that. No resolutions, no decisions, just people filing out, avoiding Marissa's gaze now instead of mine. Caleb lingered. You're doing this to punish me, he said quietly, for growing up, for not needing you. I felt that one land, deep. No, I said. I'm doing this because you stopped seeing me as a person. He left without another word. That night alone in my kitchen, I poured a glass of wine I'd been saving and let myself feel it all. The grief, the anger, the strange bitter clarity of realizing that love does not guarantee loyalty. I also made a call to someone Marissa had forgotten about entirely. Thursday morning, the audit request was filed. By Friday, the company was no longer hers to command, and she still didn't know the worst was coming. The audit hit like a dropped plate in a quiet room. Loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. By Monday afternoon, whispers had turned into emails, emails into meetings, meetings into silence behind closed doors. Marissa stopped strutting through the halls, started shutting herself into her office instead. Caleb stopped coming in early. He started coming in late. At home, my phone rang constantly. Unknown numbers, missed calls, one voicemail from Marissa that I deleted without listening. Another from Caleb, long and rambling, full of words like misunderstanding and family and please. I didn't respond. Revenge isn't loud, it's methodical. On Wednesday, the board chair asked me to lunch. Not a meeting, lunch? That told me everything. We sat in a quiet restaurant off the highway, the kind executives choose when they don't want to be seen. He didn't touch his food. Eleanor, he said, we owe you an apology. I waited. The audit has uncovered irregularities, serious ones. Misuse of funds, I said. Unauthorized transfers, conflict of interest. He nodded. Marissa insists Caleb knew nothing. I took a sip of water. He signed the approvals. Silence stretched. We're placing Marissa on administrative leave, he said finally. Effective immediately. Caleb as well. Something in my chest loosened. Not relief, recognition. What happens next, I asked. He folded his hands. That depends. There are options. Legal consequences, or quiet resignations. I thought of Thanksgiving, of Marissa's smile, of Caleb's hand squeezing hers under my table. Quiet helps the guilty sleep, I said. I'm not interested in that. He studied me carefully. You understand this will permanently alter your relationship with your son. I met his gaze. He altered it first. By Friday, Marissa's office was cleared out. By Monday, her email access was revoked. By Tuesday, the board requested my return as interim director. I declined. I don't want power, I said. I want accountability. Caleb showed up at my house that night. He looked smaller somehow, older. His confidence had cracked. You planned this, he said. Not accusing, realizing. I prepared, I corrected. You gambled. He swallowed. She said you were weak, that you'd never fight back. I opened the door wider, and you believed her. Tears finally spilled. I needed her to be right. That broke my heart more than his betrayal ever had. I raised you to stand on your own, I said softly. Not on someone else's lies. He left without asking forgiveness. Marissa didn't come at all. 2 days later, charges were filed. And for the first time since this began, I slept through the night. If you're still listening, stay with me. Because what happened next didn't just dismantle a career. It dismantled a marriage. And it forced my son to face the one truth he'd spent his entire adult life running from. The marriage didn't collapse all at once. It unraveled in public thread by humiliating thread. By the time Marissa's administrative leave became common knowledge, the office rumor mill had shifted its focus. Not on me, on her, on the receipts, on the audit trail she couldn't explain away with charm or credentials. People love a fall from grace, especially when it's earned. I heard about the first blow through someone else's whisper. She's blaming Caleb, a former colleague murmured to me near the elevators. Says he signed things without reading. I believed that part. Caleb had always trusted her with the details. trusted her with decisions he didn't want to own. The second blow came 3 days later when Marissa's attorney contacted the board requesting that all liability be limited to her role as an executive, not as a spouse. That detail reached Caleb the same afternoon. He showed up at my house again, unannounced, eyes-rimmed red hands shaking as he wrapped them around a mug of coffee he didn't drink. "She's throwing me under the bus," he said flatly. I didn't respond. "She says I should have protected her," he continued, voice rising. "That if I really loved her, I'd take responsibility." I set my mug down carefully. "And what do you think love looks like?" He stared at the floor, too long. That night, Marissa packed a bag and left their house. Not because of guilt, because of optics. She moved into a furnished condo downtown, hired a crisis management firm, and began positioning herself as a victim of workplace politics. A woman punished for ambition. A wife dragged down by her husband's incompetence. I watched it unfold the way you watch a fire through thick glass. Removed. Heart aching but clear. Caleb moved back into the guest room of the house they were about to lose. By the following week, the audit had expanded. What started as a financial review became something uglier. Vendor kickbacks, inflated contracts, a shell company registered under Marissa's maiden name. The board chair called me again. "This is bigger than we thought," he admitted. I closed my eyes briefly. It usually is. Charges were drafted. Negotiations followed. Marissa's lawyers pushed for settlement. The board refused. And then came the day Caleb was asked to testify. He called me that morning, voice hollow. "I don't know what to say." "Say the truth," I replied, for once. He didn't thank me. At the deposition he cracked. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting. He cracked quietly the way exhausted people do when there's nothing left to defend. He admitted he hadn't read documents. Admitted he'd trusted Marissa's judgment over his own. Admitted he'd believed her when she told him I was manipulating him. That last part landed hardest. "I told myself she saw things I couldn't," he said, staring at the table, "that she was protecting me from me." When Marissa was informed of his testimony, she called him screaming. He didn't answer. She left messages, threats, accusations. Then she stopped calling altogether. 3 days later, divorce papers were filed. Not by Caleb, by Marissa, on grounds of emotional abandonment and professional sabotage. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't cost so much. When Caleb told me, his voice was strangely calm. "She wants everything." "She always did," I said gently. The company placed him on indefinite leave pending the outcome of the investigation. His friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. The world he'd built around borrowed confidence collapsed into silence. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. He started listening. He came by on Sundays, helped with small things, fixed a loose cabinet hinge, asked about my garden, about my life. He never apologized directly, not yet. But he stayed. And sometimes that's how remorse begins. Marissa didn't go quietly. People like her never do. The first sign was the article. A carefully worded piece in a regional business blog praising her bold leadership while subtly questioning the ethics of legacy executives who cling to control under the guise of governance. I was mentioned once, indirectly, as an unnamed senior figure resistant to change. I smiled when I read it. She was still trying to win a narrative she'd already lost. The second sign was legal. A letter arrived at my house from her attorney, suggesting that my involvement in the audit constituted personal retaliation and family interference. They hinted at defamation, emotional distress, abuse of authority. I forwarded it to the board's legal counsel without comment. The third sign came through Caleb. "She called," he said one evening, standing in my kitchen, hands shoved into his pockets. "She says if I support her publicly, she'll go easy on me in the divorce." "And will you?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No." That was new. The trial date was set for early spring. Marissa pleaded not guilty. She arrived in court dressed in soft colors, hair pulled back, expression carefully wounded. She avoided my eyes completely. When I took the stand, she finally looked at me. Hate flickered there. Fear, too. I told the truth, simply, calmly, without embellishment. I spoke about governance, about safeguards, about why those safeguards existed. Because power tempts people to forget who they were before they had it. Her attorney tried to paint me as bitter, as controlling, as a mother unwilling to let go. I didn't rise to it. I didn't have to. The documents spoke louder than any emotion ever could. When the verdict came down, it was swift. Marissa was found liable for financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty, sentenced to restitution and barred from holding executive roles for a decade. Her public persona shattered in a single afternoon. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. She didn't stop, didn't smile, didn't cry. She just walked past head high, carrying nothing but her purse and the ruins of her ambition. Caleb stood beside me, silent. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Not loudly, not for an audience, just for me. I nodded. Forgiveness, I was learning, isn't a moment. It's a process. And consequences don't disappear just because remorse arrives late. If you're still with me, don't turn away now, because the final reckoning wasn't about careers or marriages. It was about inheritance, and the truth I had kept quietly for years. The inheritance conversation happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day that presses memories against the windows. Caleb sat across from me at the dining table, the same table where his father used to balance checkbooks and crossword puzzles. He looked thinner, older, like someone who had finally stopped running and discovered how far he'd gone. "I need to know," he said carefully, "where I stand." I had expected this moment. I'd rehearsed it in my head during sleepless nights, during long walks, during quiet mornings, when the house felt too large for one woman and her thoughts. "You want to know what you'll inherit," I said. He flinched. "I want to know what I've lost." That was closer to the truth. I stood and went to the sideboard, pulled out a folder thick with documents. Wills tend to look deceptively ordinary. Paper, ink, signatures, but they carry the weight of entire lives. "Your father and I updated our estate plan after you joined the company," I said. "We wanted protections, not from strangers, from entitlement." He swallowed. "At the time," I continued, "everything was structured for continuity, family succession, trusts. You were the primary beneficiary." His shoulders loosened just a fraction. Then things changed. I slid the papers across the table but didn't let go. "When you chose silence over honesty," I said quietly, "when you let someone else convince you I was an obstacle instead of a person, I realized something." I met his eyes. "You weren't ready." His voice cracked. "I am now." "I believe you think you are," I replied. "But readiness isn't regret, it's responsibility." I finally released the folder. Inside was the amended will. He read slowly. I watched his face shift, hope draining into disbelief. Charitable trusts, educational endowments, a foundation for women displaced by corporate misconduct, a clause establishing scholarships for mature students restarting careers after betrayal. And then his name, A Limited Trust, conditional, managed by an independent fiduciary, distributions tied to employment stability, counseling completion, and financial education benchmarks. Not nothing, but not control. "You don't trust me," he said. "I don't enable you," I corrected. He pushed the papers away. "You're punishing me." "No," I said softly. "I'm loving you without lying." Silence settled between us. Outside, rain traced lines down the glass. "Marissa said you'd do this," he murmured. "That you'd cut me out to prove a point." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Marissa never understood the point," I said. "This isn't about proving anything. It's about preventing history from repeating itself." He stared at the table, jaw clenched. Then unexpectedly he laughed. A short, broken sound. I lost everything he said, and I still wanted more. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "You lost illusions," I said. "That's not the same as everything." He nodded slowly, tears finally spilling. "I don't know how to rebuild," he whispered. "You start," I said, "by accepting boundaries." He stayed for dinner that night. We ate quietly. Not comfortably, but honestly. And when he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, exhausted but resolute. Because love that costs you your dignity isn't love. And inheritance, I had learned, is not about what you leave behind. It's about what you refuse to pass on. Winter arrived early that year. Snow dusted the sidewalks and softened the city into something quieter, slower. I found myself walking more bundled in coats I hadn't worn in years, breathing deeply like I was relearning the shape of my own life. The company finalized its restructuring without me. A younger woman was appointed interim director, competent, grounded. Someone I had quietly mentored long before Marissa ever arrived. She sent me a handwritten note. "Thank you for building something worth protecting." I kept it. Caleb found work outside the industry. Not glamorous, not powerful, honest. He didn't complain. That mattered more than I expected. We met for coffee once a week. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Sometimes we talked about everything we should have said years ago. He never asked about the will again. That mattered too. Marissa faded. At first, her name still surfaced. Court updates, settlement compliance, a brief mention of a failed consulting venture. Then less. Then nothing. Power once lost doesn't echo for long. What surprised me most was what filled the space she left behind. I started teaching again. Guest lectures at community colleges, workshops for women navigating late career transitions. I told my story without names, without drama. Just facts. The room always grew quiet when I spoke about silence, about the cost of staying quiet for the sake of peace. After one session, a woman in her 60s approached me, eyes shining. I thought it was too late to choose myself, she said. It isn't, I replied. It never is. At home, I reorganized my office, took down plaques, put up photographs, trips, birthdays, small moments that mattered more than titles ever had. I slept better, laughed more, and one evening while sorting through old boxes, I found my husband's handwriting on a yellowed envelope. If you're reading this, he'd written, "You're stronger than you think. Trust that." I cried then, deep cleansing tears, not for what I'd lost, for what I'd reclaimed. The world likes to tell women my age that our stories are over, that relevance has an expiration date, that our value lies in what we give away quietly. They're wrong. Sometimes the most powerful chapter begins when you stop being useful to everyone else and start being honest with yourself. And if you're still listening, stay with me. Because what happened next didn't come from anger. It came from peace. And it changed everything. Peace is not quiet. That surprised me. I had imagined peace as stillness, as an absence of conflict, as days that slipped by without disruption. What I discovered instead was that peace has weight. It presses decisions into your hands and asks what you intend to do with the life you've protected. The call came in late February, a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering. Mrs. Whitmore, a woman, said, professional but warm. My name is Denise Harper. I'm calling from the Colorado Center for Workforce Renewal. I sat down slowly. She explained that she'd attended one of my workshops, that she'd listened quietly while I spoke about power, about silence, about what happens when loyalty is weaponized against women who've spent decades building something only to be told they're replaceable. We want to create a formal program, she said, for women over 55 who've been pushed out, displaced, undervalued. I closed my eyes. She continued, we'd like you to lead it. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, because I was afraid of wanting it too much. I'm not looking for another executive role, I said carefully. We're not offering one, she replied. We're offering influence, on your terms. That night I lay awake thinking about all the women I'd met in those rooms. The ones who whispered their stories to me after sessions ended. The ones who'd been told to be grateful, to step aside, to fade quietly. By morning, my answer was yes. The program took shape faster than I expected. Weekly cohorts, legal literacy, financial autonomy, negotiation skills taught without apology. We called it Second Foundation. Caleb helped me set up the website, not as a favor, as work. I watched him listen to women twice his age describe being erased by companies they'd helped grow. I watched something shift in him, humility finally settling where entitlement once lived. 3 weeks in, Marissa resurfaced, not directly. An email arrived from her new attorney requesting a private conversation. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. No. The response came within minutes. She wants closure. I almost laughed. Closure is what people ask for when they want forgiveness without accountability. I deleted the email. 2 days later, a woman showed up at one of our sessions unannounced. I recognized her immediately. Marissa looked smaller without her armor. No designer blazer, no confident stride, just a careful smile and eyes that darted around the room like she was looking for exits. I just want to listen, she said softly. The room went silent. Every instinct in me screamed to ask her to leave. Instead, I said nothing. She sat, she listened, she didn't speak. At the break, she approached me. I didn't know, she said, about the damage, about how it felt. I studied her face, searched for manipulation, for performance. All I saw was exhaustion. You knew enough, I replied. She nodded. Tears pooled but didn't fall. I lost everything, she whispered. I thought of the women in that room, of the ones who'd lost livelihoods, homes, identities. So did they, I said. Marissa didn't come back after that. And I didn't need her to. Because something else was happening. Something quieter, something more permanent. I was no longer reacting to betrayal. I was building beyond it. Spring softened everything. The snow melted, the city breathed again, and so did I. Second Foundation expanded into neighboring counties, then states. Grants came in. Partnerships followed. The work was exhausting in the best possible way. One afternoon after a long session, I sat alone in the empty classroom, hands resting on the table, heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. This was mine. Not as property, as purpose. Caleb waited for me in the parking lot. He'd been doing that more often lately. Not out of obligation, out of care. "You were incredible in there," he said as we walked. I smiled. "They did the work, I just opened the door." He hesitated, then spoke. "I got accepted." I stopped. "Accepted where?" "A training program. Nonprofit management. Nights. It's going to take a while." Pride bloomed in my chest, careful and restrained. "That's good," I said. He nodded. "I didn't tell you because I wanted anything. I just wanted you to know." We stood there in the fading light, two people rebuilding a relationship without pretending it had never broken. Later that week, I updated my will again. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The house would be sold someday. The proceeds would fund Second Foundation in perpetuity, scholarships, legal defense funds, emergency housing grants for women blindsided by betrayal. Caleb remained in the trust, still conditional, still protected. Not because I doubted him, because boundaries are a form of love. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat in my garden with a book and a cup of tea. The air smelled like damp earth and possibility. I thought about the woman I'd been when this story began. Tired, dismissed, afraid to speak too loudly. She would not recognize me now. And maybe that's the point. We are allowed to outgrow the versions of ourselves that survived betrayal. We are allowed to choose justice without cruelty, strength without bitterness, love without surrender. If my story has taught me anything, it's this. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like refusing to disappear. If you're listening to this and you've been told you're too old, too inconvenient, too much trouble to keep around, hear me clearly. You are not finished. Your voice still matters. And the most powerful chapter of your life may be the one you haven't dared to write yet. Stay with me. There's one more chapter to tell. The letter arrived in late summer, slipped between grocery store flyers and utility bills like it belonged there. It didn't. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, restrained, as if emotion itself were being rationed. Caleb's. I carried it inside and let it sit on the kitchen counter while I made tea. Chamomile. Slow movements. I had learned not to rush moments that could still hurt. When I finally opened it, I read it standing up. "Mom, I've rewritten this letter more times than I want to admit. Every version sounded like an excuse, and I don't want to give you another one of those. I need you to know something clearly, not because it will fix anything, but because it's true. I failed you before I betrayed you. I failed you when I stopped listening, when I let someone else convince me that your experience was control, that your boundaries were obstacles, that your love was conditional when it never was. I told myself I was choosing my own life. What I was really doing was choosing the version of myself that required the least courage. Losing everything stripped that away. Not just the job or the marriage, but the illusion that I was entitled to outcomes without accountability. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect trust. I'm not asking for anything at all. I just want you to know that I see you now, not as my safety net, not as my legacy, as a woman who stood up when it would have been easier to disappear. Whatever place I have in your life going forward, I'll accept it, even if that place is small. Caleb. I sat down slowly. For a long time, I did nothing but breathe. This letter was different from the others. No accusations, no bargaining, no self-pity dressed up as regret. Just ownership. That night, I wrote back. Caleb, I believe you. Belief is not the same as restoration. Trust is built through consistency, not words. You know that now. I'm proud of the work you're doing. I'm glad you're learning. I'm glad you're still here. We will take this one step at a time. Mom, I didn't promise more than I could give. And that was the most honest thing I could offer. In the weeks that followed, something quiet settled between us. Not reconciliation, not estrangement. Reality. We shared meals occasionally. Conversations stayed present. No rewrites of the past, no demands on the future. I watched him show up, on time, prepared, humble, and I let myself feel something I hadn't allowed before. Hope without obligation. Meanwhile, Second Foundation reached a milestone. 100 women had completed the program. 73 had secured new employment. 12 had launched their own consulting practices. 3 had gone back to school. One woman, a former accountant in her 60s, hugged me after graduation and whispered, "You gave me my spine back." I went home that night and cried, not from pain, from purpose, because I finally understood something I'd missed all those years climbing ladders and smoothing conflicts. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. It's what lives on because you chose not to shrink. And I was far from finished. The anniversary came quietly. 1 year since the day Marissa told me to clear out my office. 1 year since the moment that cracked my life open and forced me to choose who I would become next. I didn't mark it with anger. I marked it with a gathering. Friends filled my backyard under strings of soft lights. Women from Second Foundation, colleagues who'd stood by me, neighbors who had brought soup during the worst weeks. Caleb arrived too, a little unsure then, steadier when I smiled and handed him a plate. Laughter drifted into the evening air, real laughter, the kind that doesn't perform or impress, the kind that settles into your bones. At some point, someone asked me if I'd ever wished I'd handled things differently. I looked around before answering. At the woman who'd started her own business at 62. At the former executive who'd learned how to say no without apologizing. At my son standing a little apart listening instead of leading. No, I said. I wish I'd trusted myself sooner, but regret doesn't build futures. Later, when the yard had emptied and the dishes were stacked, I stood alone beneath the lights and let the quiet return. I thought about the woman at the beginning of this story. The one who nodded politely while being erased. The one who mistook endurance for virtue. She had survived, but she had not lived fully. That changed the moment I stopped asking for permission to protect myself. Revenge stories often end with ruin, with scorched earth and empty victories. This one didn't. It ended with boundaries, with consequences, with growth that hurt but held. I didn't destroy my son. I didn't chase Marissa into oblivion. I didn't reclaim power just to wield it the way it had been used against me. I chose something harder. I chose integrity. I chose to be seen. And in doing so, I reclaimed a life that was always mine. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a betrayal you never imagined, hear me. You don't need to scream to be strong. You don't need to destroy to win. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply refusing to disappear. If this story resonated with you, if it mirrored something you've lived through or feared, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from. Share your story in the comments if you're ready. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about justice, boundaries, and rebuilding after betrayal, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because it's never too late to take your life back. And you are not alone.